On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. On Story, presented by Austin Film Festival, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers and directors. This week's On Story, Daredevil co-writers Ruth Fletcher Gage and Christos Gage.
The thing about comic book writing is there's no set format. It's just about understanding what your medium is. But the good news is, which is also kind of scary in comics, is there's a lot less set rules. It's whatever works.
In this episode, Ruth and Christos Gage take us behind the scenes of Netflix's hit urban crime superhero series, Daredevil.
Among the first things we decided is, what do we want to do? How long has Matt been doing this? In the comics, he became Daredevil at a fairly, he was like in high school at least when he lost his eyesight. Drew decided to make him younger for a variety of reasons. So there's things, you're doing a TV show. It's a TV show adapted from a comic, but it's got to be the best TV show you can do. Ruth was the only one who'd never read a Daredevil comic, and she said, should I read this? And we were all like, Drew especially and Stephen were like, no, we need someone in the room who has never read a Daredevil comic, because a bunch of our audience will never have read a Daredevil comic.
I was also the only woman in the room, but I think it was actually harder being the only I grew up on comic book. I came from a town that was like 2,000 people, so my entire access to comics growing up was one spinning rack. The only woman on the spinning rack was Lois Lane, so there was not even a Wonder Woman. So my entire exposure to comics was like the Wonder Woman television show and the Hulk and that kind of stuff. So it was actually harder in some ways to be the only non-comic book person in the room than it was to be the only woman in the room.
But necessary because
stuff didn't make sense to me. And I was like, okay, guys, if this doesn't make sense to me, you're not going to appeal. The whole point is we wanted to bring Daredevil. We wanted to bring this character because he's such a great character to a much broader audience. So we wanted people who never read a comic book to be like, oh, I hear the show is great, and turn on the show and be like, oh, wow, I'm going to look at more comic book properties because this show is so awesome. And if you look at the most successful movies like The Avengers or Guardians of the Galaxy, they did the same thing. I mean, you go in and you're like, you love the characters, and then you're like, oh wow, I want to find out more about this. I'm more interested in all of these different worlds.
I felt like this is what I've been preparing for my entire life. I've been reading comics since the mid-'70s and never got to that stage where I did discover girls, but I didn't like them enough to stop reading comics for them. I've been and then I went to film school and learned to be got a master's degree in screenwriting. So I was like, oh, this is my thing. For Ruth, I suspect it had a lot more to do with, we really clicked with Drew in an amazing way.
It was kind of amazing because Drew's favorite movie was Last of the Mohicans, which is the first movie I ever worked on. Drew's best friend was Brian K. Vaughan, who was doing a show Under the Dome with Neil Baer, our showrunner. So Drew
from SVU.
So Drew picked up the phone, called Brian K. Vaughan. He was like, oh, Neil said they wrote Dick Wolf's favorite episode of SVU. Yeah. And so it felt very much for me, and this is a huge thing for me. We're very different in like what's important to us. For me, it's as much about like who you're working with, and because we just had so many experiences where the reason why things didn't work is because someone didn't want it to work in the project. And so we walked into that room and it was as if everything was right. We came into the room and Drew said, this is before we were ever even hired, and he said, I see this as a movie. And so for us, that was perfect because we had done movies for 10 years and we immediately got what he was saying. So he was saying act 1 is this, act 2 is this, act 3 is this. And the characters are, and the backstories of the characters are extraordinarily important as to why they make the decisions they make. And he came from Lost, he came from Buffy. So these were all shows where that kind of stuff was really important. And so they were very different experiences. Working with Drew was like the best. I don't know. It was, Law & Order was really, really great, but working with Drew was like probably the best experience that we've ever had because it was the most interesting combination. It was like closest to writing a movie, but with a group of people who all contributed and were all pretty brilliant.
The Devil of Hell's Kitchen, The Man in the Mask. The first season was really about Matt Murdock becoming Daredevil and Wilson Fisk becoming the Kingpin. By saying, I see this as a 13-hour movie really helped us with that. I mean, we'd written, as Ruth said, movies for the first 10 years of our career. And so that was helpful. But we had been gravitating towards the shows that we watched for enjoyment, being those types of shows, whether they be Fargo. And it's actually very similar to the British model where they don't call it season 1, season 2, they call it series 1, series 2. Yeah. A lot of times it'll be a closed-ended story, and then maybe they'll put out a second series, or maybe they won't. It's very interesting because when we first started in film school, things were very rigid and stratified. If you were a feature writer, you didn't write TV until you couldn't get work in features anymore. It was a step down. If you were a live-action TV writer, you did not write animation. That was that was the ghetto. If you didn't write comic books, God forbid. Ever. And it started when people like Kevin Smith and Joss Whedon said, the hell with that. I like all these things, and I'm going to do them all. All these feature writers want to get into TV because you have more time to explore the characters. You can make Wilson Fisk a fully realized villain instead of a mustache twirling. It was so funny. Vincent D'Onofrio, when he had his first conversation with Steven, said, now I was reading Spider-Man comics in the 60s with Kingpin. I remember he had a mind-controlling cane. Yeah. Are you guys doing that? And Steven was like, no, we're not. It's okay, Vincent. We're not doing the mind-controlling cane.
One of the things that was both most striking about the episode that you worked on and maybe most successful about it was the way that you all manipulated time. Sort of flashing forward and coming back and telling the story and then, bouncing back to the fight with the ninja all the way through.
That was Ruth's idea. And speaking of Joss Whedon, we ripped it off from Out of Gas, the episode of Firefly.
So when we first came in and we were talking about this with Drew and Drew left and Steven came in my mind, this was how our episode was going to be. I never varied in my mind that it was going to be, the structure was going to be from Out of Gas. And I felt that way because I felt like our audience was smart, first of all, and that they were going to know a lot of things by the time they got to our episode. And if we had done a traditional structure, I just felt like we would be like selling them. We would just be saying to them, we know you know this, but we don't care. And we're just going to do this, and you're going to suffer through this episode. Because there was a lot of stuff that had to be revealed in the episode in addition to...
Talk, fight. Yeah. We didn't want to do that.
And so we get to the pitch of our episode, which Drew had approved of, but Steven was now there, and Steven was gone to New York. And I came in, and we pitched the episode, and the executives were like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
They were worried the audience would be confused by the manipulation.
You're going to confuse your audience. I was like,
5 ninjas?
I was like, okay, so first of all, our audience is brilliant. We're not going to confuse them. But they were like, they just had this whole list of stuff, as to reasons why we could not do this episode this way. And I had no idea. I was stunned because I had never thought about any other way to do the episode. Chris was like, oh, we'll figure it out. I was like, we can make it work,
no problem.
We'll figure it out. Yeah. And I was like, no, I don't think we can figure this. Like, and so thank God Steven came back from New York and he was like, okay, so I understand there's like sort of a controversial thing about this episode. Pitch me the episode. And I was like, it's Out of Gas. And I pitched in the episode, and he was like, "Oh, I love it. It's brilliant. Go do it." And so the great thing is the Netflix executive came up to us after it became like one of the most successful episodes and one of the most liked episodes. And the Netflix executive came up first, and he goes, "I have to tell you, like, I'd never seen Firefly, and I didn't know what Out of Gas was, and so when you wrote this up, it just seemed really confusing to me." And I was like,
and he was reacting to it in pitch form, not the screenplay. Yeah, just like an outline.
And he was like, "I'm really sorry, I was wrong." And I was like, first of all, that's really cool to hear that from an executive.
But the other thing that I think worked well in that structure, because when it first streamed, we were watching. There were people on Twitter like live tweeting, watching their episodes, and by starting it with the ninja fight, by opening it right up with a ninja fight, people think, oh, this is what we're going to build up to at the end of the episode. So then when the fight with the ninja is over and then Wilson Fisk comes in, like there was one guy who was hilarious and he was like, "Oh, it's Fisk." He was tweeting it. and
Thank you. Nobu is becoming an issue. Appreciate you removing him from concern.
You wanted me to do this.
In a perfect world, we would have taken each other out. But it isn't a perfect world, is it? Not yet.
Had we done it in the other structure where it's like talk, he breaks in, ninja fight, then Fisk comes in, it would have felt like a video game, like Boss 1, Boss 2, you know? And this way it felt like, here's something that we're leading up to the entire episode, but wait, there's something else. Yeah. And then to end with Foggy pulling his mask off.
We knew that was going to be the emotional moment in the scene. But I just felt like, like Chris said, if you just did this linearly, then everybody's just going to be like, oh, and instead I thought, we should just give them what we want them to think the episode is about. And then at the end, we're like, oh, no, we've got this reveal.
One of the things we knew is we had these amazing actors in Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio and Yelette Zurer, who plays Vanessa, and they were never in scenes together. There was one bit where Daredevil and Kingpin talk to each other on a walkie-talkie, but when you have great actors, you want to put them in scenes together. So we talked about that. How can we make this work? And we came up with what I will admit is a flimsy premise, which is he's like, well, she's in this picture. Wilson Fisk has gone public, and who's this woman in the picture with him? Oh, she runs an art gallery. Well, maybe I'll go pay her a visit and try to get some insight into what he's like. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, we were shooting it, and Vincent, who is the sweetest guy and an amazing actor, he was like, "Yeah, there's a thread in this scene that if you pull it too much, the whole thing completely unravels." And we were like, "Yeah." And then he was like, "No worries, I'll make it work." And not a single person said, because we talked about this in the room a lot. Yeah. Why is he going to this art gallery? What does he think he's going to find out? He's blind. What's going on?
Well, Steven was obsessed with Heat, so he was obsessed with the scene from Heat where De Niro and Pacino meet, and so Steven was really kind of obsessed with this, with
putting them in the room together. And he was right. Everyone loved the scene, and
But Vincent was also correct. Like logically, it didn't.
There was no reason for it to happen.
Exactly
and Wilson Fisk just happens to pick that moment to visit. How delightful.
I'm not interrupting. I was nearby.
Not at all. We were just talking about you.
I see.
Mm-hmm. Wilson Fisk. Matthew
Murdoch. Oh, yes, the attorney. I've heard about all your work in Hell's Kitchen.
It's really kind of creepy when your actor is so brilliant that he walks up to you and literally says to you what you just spent like 6 weeks discussing in the writer's room. And Vincent D'Onofrio did that like every day. Like I started to feel like he had like some listening device, and because every weakness in the story, and this we were on the set with him like more than once, was like every weakness in the story, he knew it, and he knew we talked about it, and he would come walk up to one of us and he'd be like, and he would just
and sometimes we'd tweak something, but most of the times he'd be like, all right, let's just do it as written, and then we'll make it work. And
there were times where we were like, their Marvel is never going to change that, and he would be like, okay, and then he would just walk on to the set, and he was astonishing. He could figure out a way to make you believe whatever, even if it wasn't completely plausible.
Here's a couple of interesting things. One is they are both characters who have a rage inside of them. And it comes out in different ways. In Matt, he channels it into going out and beating up bad people who do bad things to good people. Wilson channels it by every now and then he decapitates somebody with a car door. And they both believe they're doing the right thing. The other thing is, and this was very subtle, they are both men who were severely damaged by their fathers. Wilson hated his father and killed him. Matt loved his father, but one of the things Drew and I talked about earlier was Matt must be so angry at his father for leaving him. Yeah. So there are so many parallels between the two of them that we really wanted to hit that. And the conversation with Father Lantham is really about Matt asking the question of, at what point do I cross the line and become the thing I am fighting? And Father Lantham pushing him to ask himself the question of, are you doing this for the betterment of the world, or are you doing it for selfish reasons? Because you want to go out and hit somebody and something, and there's this rage you need to get out. And these are things I don't think were ever completely settled or will ever be settled. They're interesting parts of the characters. With Wilson, I think in the final episode, it's interesting as he sort of accepts that he's the bad guy and becomes the kingpin.
It's funny, isn't it? How even the best of men can be deceived by their true nature.
What the hell does that mean?
It means that I'm not the Samaritan. That I'm not the priest or the Levite. That I am the ill intent who set upon the traveler on a road that he should not have been on.
Just as Matt accepts, one of the things we talked about is the idea that if someone were to actually say to Matt, you're a superhero, you're like Captain America, he'd be like, get out of here with that. You know, these are the guys who wrecked my neighborhood. It was always part of the concept of the show. A lot of it is part of the concept of the comics we're taking it from also, but one of the reasons why Drew wanted to make Matt younger when he lost his father, because he just this vulnerable blind kid. And
although there's a fascinating story about just that subject, which is that when it was initially shot, when Matt was blinded, Matt's father was not there, and the scene was disastrous because there was this little boy alone, and
a bunch of random
people, and it was completely confusing, and there was no emotional resonance at all whatsoever.
And it's the opening scene of the entire show. It's the opening scene
of the whole thing.
And we were like,
oh my God, this is terrible.
His father needs to be in this scene.
Steven said that.
And
the fascinating thing is Drew is the most brilliant person that writes emotional resonance. Like, you read his stuff and you just want to crawl into his screenplays because you just love, he wrote the second one, which is Cut Man. And, you know, at the end of that episode, you just want to just...
When he saves the little boy and he's like, let's get you back to your father, when it's, you know, obviously so cathartic for him.
But he wrote that scene, and when you read it, it never occurred to you this is not going to work. And then, but Steven kept saying, I don't think this scene's going to work. I don't think this scene's going to work. And I was like...
So they actually reshot it at a considerable expense because Steven realized his father needs to be in this scene for it to feel, you know, that's my son. Let me in. Let me through. That's my son. And it works. It worked perfectly.
Get out of my way! Get out of my way!
Don't move. Help is coming, kid.
Manny, don't move, okay? No, just don't move. Somebody get us some help!
Let me just start with a little background for people who may not know comics. For the longest time in comics, characters did not have religions because it was a simple marketing, you don't talk about religion and politics. You didn't know what political party, in fact, it's a controversy right now. Is Captain America a Democrat or a Republican? Well, let's face it, he's an FDR Democrat. He grew up in the Depression. From the comic book publisher's perspective, why put something in your character that might alienate a segment of your audience? Frank Miller was among the first to actually give a comic book character a religion in Matt Murdock, and now since then, like I believe it was Dan Slott who revealed that the Thing from the Fantastic Four is Jewish. And it's become more and more the attitude is, look, diversity is an actual thing. People have religion that is important in their lives, or a lack of it, and this is another interesting facet of character. But Daredevil was among the first and among the most high profile. So I from the very first day, Drew said to us, I want to explore Matt's Catholicism, and I want it to be a positive force in his life. And that was a big part of our episode, and I know it was important to Ruth, so I'm going to let her talk about.
I actually loved the idea of exploring Catholicism in Matt, and I don't know how I would have felt if Drew had said, I want to explore the dark side of Catholicism. Because I wanted to try to see something different. I wanted to see sort of something new and fresh. And so I thought that was just amazing. And it was really amazing to me because I think there's so many things in all different kinds of religion that are universal.
There's a scene where Matt is talking to his priest and in general about good and evil, and when it's okay, if it's okay to kill somebody, if they're evil, et cetera, et cetera. And Ruth said, we need stories here and passages from the Bible.
Stephen and Chris's version of this, first of all, they didn't seem to think he was a father, that he had anything to do with religion, which was a little bit strange.
Well, Stephen's an atheist.
An atheist.
And I go to church, well, I was going to say twice a year, but I don't even do that anymore.
And so they both had this idea for these scenes that was just very dry, and there was nothing personal about the scenes. And I actually grew up in a church, and I'm not, I don't go to church every Sunday or whatever, but it was something that was like a positive experience of my life. And Drew Goddard, our showrunner from the very beginning, had said to us, we have a lot of negative portrayals of the Catholic Church, and there are certainly reasons to raise questions about a lot of stuff that's happened in the church, but for him, the church was kind of a sanctuary, and he always felt like that was a place that he could go for advice or go for guidance or whatever. And I felt the same way.
But I remember Ruth saying, so we need a passage from the Bible, and she found one which was so perfect, it was from Psalms. It was like a muddied river or a polluted fountain is the righteous man who gives way to sin. And what was so brilliant about her finding this one is that Matt's reaction is, so if I give way to sin, if I allow an evil man to act, then I'm doing something bad, so I should kill him. And then the father says, well, no, that's one interpretation.
Like a muddied spring or a polluted fountain is the righteous man who gives way before the wicked. Proverbs 25 something, I never can remember.
Meaning righteous men have a duty to stand up to evil.
One interpretation. Another is that when the righteous succumb to sin, it is as harmful as if the public well were poisoned. Because the darkness of such an act, of taking a life, will spread to friends, neighbors, the entire community.
And that was probably the crux of what the episode was about.
Something that's extremely important in comics, and actually in almost everything that is done, is who is your moral center. So the shows that are most successful, Breaking Bad kind of pushed the envelope a little bit, but they were really interesting in that they kind of rolled it over. So one time one character was the person you were rooting for, and
you're rooting for Walter, and then you're rooting for Hank, and then you're rooting for.
If you look at most shows like Deadwood, for instance, there's a moral center in Deadwood. The sheriff and Saul, and there are people. So in our show, it was Claire.
When we were on that roof, you told that Russian that you hurt people because you enjoy it.
And you said you didn't believe that.
I can't believe that. Because if I do, that means you're not the man that I believe you to be.
I need to be the man this city needs.
Okay, that's not a reason, it's an excuse.
What do you want me to do, Claire? Let them tear Hell's Kitchen apart? Let them win?
What you do is important to so many people. I get that. I just don't think I can let myself fall in love with someone who's so damn close to becoming what he hates.
Most of the best series that you will ever watch, there have to be those people who are, because quite frankly, our audiences relate to those people. And that was really important for our show, that we felt like no matter how dark we got, and we were pretty dark, that there were still people around us who gave us a different perspective.
You've been watching a conversation with Daredevil's Ruth and Christos Gage on OnStory. OnStory is part of a growing number of programs in Austin Film Festival's OnStory project, including the OnStory PBS series, now streaming online, the OnStory radio program and podcast in collaboration with Public Radio International, and the OnStory book series available on Amazon. To find out more about OnStory and Austin Film Festival, visit onstory.tv or austinfilmfestival.com.